there have been far too many mistakes made, and like I said, I feel that really the political advantage that the party achieved in December 2019 under Boris Johnson has been squandered, and that again is a big factor for me deciding that actually it's far more productive in my life to do something different.
This is the exit interview of Henry Edward Miller-Smith, Conservative MP for Crawley since 2010. Your exit interview, a chance for us both to learn what you could have done better. So let's start with the question we always do with the exit interview. Why are you leaving?
Well, there's a number of reasons. 1997, and I'm going to be 55 in a few weeks' time, and I want another challenge, another opportunity in my life, another career. But also, I do feel a little bit disillusioned. 4.5 years ago, we were elected, or my party, the Conservatives, were elected with an 80-seat majority as it was then. And I appreciate we've had a global pandemic and we've had war in Europe, but I do think there's a lot more we could have done to be bolder, and there were a lot of missed opportunities. So I feel personally it's time to move on, but I suppose I've lost that zest, really, that you need if you're going to be in politics and public life to really promote the principles that you believe in.
You stood in Crawley in 2001 and 2005 before finally being elected in 2010. Is it hard to walk away when you spent basically a quarter of a century, half your life you've spent either trying to get elected or then being the MP?
Well, and in actual fact, in 2005, I lost by 37 votes, which was the closest result in the country, that general election. Yes, I've invested a lot of my time and energy into politics, into public office in various different kinds. Politics is in my blood. I'm not going to sort of suddenly have a disinterest in it going forward. But I think you really need to have the energy to be able to fight an election campaign, and also the energy to properly represent people. And I feel that when you get the feeling that it's time to move on, you should probably listen to yourself and pick the moment of your departure, perhaps rather than other people picking that for you. So I think a combination of things with mixed emotions means that now's the time to move on. But, proud of some of the achievements that I've been able to realise both in local government and in Parliament.
Let me be cynical for a moment, because it's been the case with several of your colleagues who've come in for this. You've got a majority of just over 8,000. If we look at the polls, if we look at what's happened in by-elections, is there part of this that actually you just can't face traipsing around campaigning again? It looks like the Tories are going to lose that seat.
That's a factor, undoubtedly, that if you feel that it's going to be an uphill struggle to retain your seat, then that is a demotivating factor. Of course it is. I think that's human nature. But I think more so, I've reached a point in my life when I want to look for other opportunities and do new things. Of course, retaining that interest in politics that I have, but it just feels like a natural moment. And it's something that I've been considering actually for about the last 2.5 years, that now is probably a time to make a change. The polls are challenging, but, never say never. A week's a long time in politics, and I suspect we've got about 6 months to go. Who knows what could happen in that time.
You talked about losing slightly the zest for it all, the enthusiasm for it all. I mean, you must have had some zest to go out campaigning as a Conservative in 2001. William Hague leading you into that. It didn't go terribly well. 2005, again, you got close. Michael Howard didn't particularly. What does it say then about Rishi Sunak, that he's the one, that his leadership, the current position of the Conservative Party, is the one that you've lost the faith with?
Well, I think we have had a series of unforced errors during this Parliament. There have been a number of mistakes that, quite frankly, were made that shouldn't have been made, and there's been quite a series of them in quick succession, which does lead to some despondency that the team that you have worked so hard for perhaps aren't delivering, and I take my part in that as a team. Despite, as I say, global pandemics and war in Europe and all the other economic consequences of that, there have been far too many mistakes made. And like I said, I feel that really the political advantage that the party achieved in December 2019 under Boris Johnson has been squandered, and that again is a big factor for me deciding that actually it's far more productive in my life to do something different.
It's interesting because you've spent clearly most of your adult life in Conservative politics, one sort or another. You said you were leader of the council and then MP. You've never been a minister. Do you think that party leadership takes for granted the foot soldiers, whether that's MPs on the backbenches or councillors across the country?
I think that's true of all parties in Parliament. I think that there is a danger that you can lose touch with the grassroots, the people who do go out several times a week in many instances, knocking on doors, and that's always a challenging thing in terms of the response you sometimes will get in more challenging areas and cold weather and getting rained on and all the rest of it. That is those are, as you say, the foot soldiers, the people who really support parties. They attend the social events, they fundraise locally, and I think whenever a party leadership starts to drift away from that grassroots, then that's bad news. I think we've seen that in both Labour and Conservative governments throughout recent history.
Given it, but the Conservatives seem to be braced for a pretty rough set of local elections in May. What's that like when you are a foot soldier, a councillor, either hanging on to your seat or otherwise, then being asked to go out and campaign a few months later for the very people who've probably just cost you your seat?
Well, that is a challenge. But what I have always been blessed with is coming across really dedicated people in my local Conservative association, people who are knocking on doors and delivering leaflets and trying to get councillors elected and the Member of Parliament elected because they believe in the principles of the party. Now, obviously, that's a lot more challenging when all of the headlines and the opinion polls are telling you that it's probably going to be a difficult set of local elections and well, I'm sure a difficult general election campaign as well.
You talked about some of the mistakes that have been made. You were a staunch supporter of Brexit. Do you think that the government has done enough to take advantage of what you saw as being the opportunities of Brexit?
No, and that's one of the reasons why I think we've actually squandered some of the freedoms that we have since leaving the European Union. Whether you agree with our leaving the European Union or not, we did, and we should have been, I think, a lot more bold in realising those freedoms. So just one, for example, we don't have to have a VAT regime after we've left the European Union. We could have a local sales tax system. That's just one example of a way that we could have been much more bold in terms of quite a different vision. And I do think there has been some shall we say, establishment and institutional drag on realising those opportunities. Undoubtedly, COVID significantly got in the way of that, both in terms of the restrictions that were brought in and the economic impact of that. But I do feel a lot more could have been done. And of course, we had those sort of torturous years from the referendum result until the December 2019 election, when many in Parliament were seeking to overturn what the people had voted for.
Yeah, that period, none of us would want to revisit that 3 years. Basically,
it was
nothing
deep,
happened.
it was actually being part of it was very stressful.
Yeah.
It was a really sort of anxious moment.
And actually, towards the end of that, it's almost exactly 5 years ago, we had this situation where Theresa May was slipping into the low 20s in the polls. There was a party on the right on the up, was the Brexit party then, now it's the Reform UK.
I think I know where you're going with
Around that point, you said, I won't be surprised at all if more voters turn to the Brexit Party. Nigel Farage is certainly doing a better job than Theresa May in leading. Is Nigel Farage doing a better job than Rishi Sunak now?
Well, I don't think Nigel Farage is a candidate at the moment. Maybe that will change, but I think it's always dangerous when a political party drifts away from its core principles and purpose, and slightly loses its way. And I, sadly feel that that's where the Conservative Party has been. So, little wonder that other parties, both major parties like Labour and minor parties like Reform, are reaping the benefits of that. What I'm very struck by is, though, there is a sort of a plague on all your houses attitude with the electorate. I still speak to the electorate, knocking on doors myself in the cold and the rain still, there's no great enthusiasm for Keir Starmer and Labour. It's just they're not the Tories. So I think, there's still a lot of undecideds, and I suspect we will see quite a few stay-at-homes, certainly in the local elections, possibly in the general election as well.
If you weren't a Conservative MP, you won't be at the next election, would you be tempted to vote for Reform?
No, as you said earlier on, I've spent my life. I joined the Conservative Party when I was a teenager. I first stood for election unsuccessfully against Labour in 1996. I've seen it all before. I've seen the ups and the downs, the triumphs and the disappointments, and I believe that. It is recoverable for the Conservative Party to find its principles, to find its purpose again, so no, I'm not sort of tempted by sort of minority parties, even though I understand why they are popular and why they have risen as a result of events.
You talked also actually in 2019, and this is something that's come up when we've been doing this series with cross-political parties, about the threats that MPs are under, and you and your family, including threats and stalking. That was back in 2019. It seems to me that it's probably even got worse since then.
Sadly, I think it probably has. Previously I had people publish where my children go to school on a website, sort of with an encouragement to go to that school, I don't know what, but anyway, publishing where your children go to school is pretty horrendous. Yes, I did have a stalking incident as well, and of course, there's just the everyday common and garden abuse that you get on social media. It does seem to be that with social media, there's a degree of separation. Like some people lose their cool when they get behind the wheel with road rage. I think when there is that degree of separation, when people aren't engaging face to face, then people say some pretty vile things. And I think anyone in public life, whether it's politics or other aspects, sport or celebrity or the royal family, I think that the way that people interact on social media has been quite corrosive. I support social media in the fact that any of us can post what we're up to, what our thoughts are. That's positive. That's sort of a greater democratization of media, but that doesn't excuse abuse, and that does wear people down. You have to have a thick skin, at the risk of sounding cliched as a politician, but it does get you down after a while.
One of the questions we've been asking this exit interview, it was a classic sort of exit interview question, is would you recommend this job to a friend or someone you cared about?
Only under the circumstances that you were really passionate about wanting to be involved in public life and wanting to make a positive difference. I think it's quite instructive that neither of my two children, who are almost 21 and 18, they have absolutely no signs of wanting to go into politics, and I wouldn't try and dissuade them otherwise.
We'll come in a minute to your assessment of some of your bosses over the years. I wanted to ask you, though, about one of your big things. You haven't become a minister over during your time in the Commons. Was that deliberate? Were you ever asked? Were you offered the greasy pole at one point and you declined?
Yes, I was approached on a number of occasions, but I decided, my seat has always been a marginal seat. Whoever has won my seat since it was created in 1983 has gone on to be the party of government, and I made a decision that really being hopefully a good constituency MP was where I was best placed, and to pursue interests in Parliament, both constituency interests and interests I have more widely through chairing all party parliamentary groups, for example, and being able to take part in debates. Of course, if you're in the Whip's office, traditionally you can't take part in debates, and so I think that is something that really restricts your ability to be a constituency MP. And I'm very passionate about our system. I think the link where, approximately a community of 100,000 people has one individual that is representing them in Parliament, and you meet your constituents on a regular basis, and you're involved in your local community. I think that's a really strong aspect, and something, one of the parts of the job actually I've really enjoyed.
One of the things, it struck me that maybe if you had become a minister, animal welfare would have been quite high on your list of potential jobs. You've done a lot calling for bans on foie gras, fur imports. You're a vegetarian. You were even endorsed by Brian May from Queen at one point for opposing badger culling. Are we still a nation of animal lovers, do you think?
I hope so, and I believe so, but sometimes I think that we slightly turn a blind eye to some of the abuse that goes on in terms of the way we treat animals, whether it's for food production or still a lot of cruelty that exists. So yeah, animal welfare has always been a passion of mine. I got that from my late mum. She would always write to our local MP when I was growing up, pestering them on animal welfare issues. So I think it had a lasting effect. And even when I leave Parliament, it's still an area that I'm keen to try to play my part in.
I think it's fair to say you've always been quite straight talking. So maybe diplomacy wasn't the thing. In 2013, you called Vladimir Putin a tosser on social media because you were angry at that point about support for the Assad regime. But maybe given everything that's unfolded since, you were right. You were ahead of your time.
Sadly, I think I've been proved correct on that one. He's obviously it's an evil individual. I'll try and keep it polite this time, Matt. Clearly a very malign force. And so, I thought so at the time, and unfortunately, I've been vindicated in that.
Okay, let's do some classic exit interview things. Then let's go through assess your relationship with your various bosses over the years. If you could sum up them in a word or a phrase, let's start with David Cameron. David Cameron in a word.
Aplomb. I thought he was very dedicated and principled and quite cool under pressure. So, and I think still is now as Foreign Secretary.
He's back.
Aplomb in a word.
Very good. Theresa May in a word.
I think she was very dedicated. I had my differences with Theresa May. I didn't think she handled the Brexit negotiations in the way that they should have done. But I think she's a very genuine individual who cares. So I would say dedication.
What about Boris Johnson in a word?
Well, he's a superstar. He is somebody who, against the odds, became mayor of London. He's somebody that has one of those rare abilities to connect with people across many different backgrounds. He's known as Boris. He's not known as Mr. Johnson. I think after perhaps the quite managerial style of Theresa May that got us sort of bogged down during the Brexit negotiations, he offered that sort of star quality to be able to communicate to communities that traditionally the Conservative Party hadn't done very well in. But like many stars, perhaps they have some flaws, and I think he was the victim of some of those mistakes that he made. He does have that star quality, and I think continues to be extremely popular when you speak to people, the average voter in the street.
Do you think it was partly did he let that star quality go to his head a bit? That actually, as well as being very good and popular out in the public, you do need to do the work, whether that's making an album or a film or running the country.
I think perhaps he wasn't so focused on detail, and I think that's perhaps where he got caught up with the just the enormity of government, and that times many percentages in terms of a period of crisis which the COVID pandemic created.
Okay, so we've got a plum dedicated superstar, Liz Truss, in a word.
Ambitious, both in a good way and a bad way. I think she's genuinely ambitious for economic growth, but she was also.
Then who isn't?
Well, I think that was really her real mission. But I think her personal ambition, perhaps, was the thing that undid her very quickly, because she didn't, I think, explain what her sort of reason for that budget, that infamous budget, why she was making those decisions that she was. So I think she almost she came out of the starting blocks very quickly and then tripped over on herself, I think. So ambition in both a good and a bad way.
Finally, then, Rishi Sunak, in a word.
I think he's very conscientious. He's somebody that works incredibly hard, from what I can see. I do think he really cares about the country and trying to make a positive difference. I think he has taken on the premiership at a time that is obviously extremely difficult for his party, with everything that has happened, which doesn't really need repeating. But I think he's genuine and conscientious in his approach.
Would it make any difference to the Conservative Party's fortunes if you change leader again?
I think we would lose any credibility if we did that. It doesn't sit comfortably with me that he wasn't elected to the leadership, if I'm being absolutely honest. But I think if we were to have yet another leadership change in the Conservative Party, history shows that the electorate doesn't support divided parties. Whatever the reason for that division is, and I think it's frankly too late for a refresh.
You talked a bit about some of your pride in your work, particularly did on local constituency and maintaining that link, and you enjoying that part of the job. Which part of the job do you enjoy the least?
I just think the long hours, and it's got better actually during my time in Parliament, but it's still not a natural working environment. Today on a Monday, typically we'll go till 10:30, 7:30 Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and perhaps more normal hours on Thursdays and Fridays. But one of the things I regret about being a member of Parliament is the impact it has on family. So when I was elected in 2010, my daughter was it was her 7th birthday when I was elected, and my son was 4 years old, and I missed a lot of their growing up, and that is something that I regret. It is hugely stressful on family life, and anyone thinking of going into Parliament needs to stop and really think extremely carefully about that.
Is there actually something we could do with the political system so that, because this has come up time and time again across parties, that it feels as if anyone in their 30s, 40s, 50s ends up basically having to make the choice between politics representing their country, their constituency, and seeing their kids grow up. And that seems like, in a modern country, that seems an odd way to either exclude people or to make them miserable.
It's not a normal job. It's not normal hours. Now, when you go into public life, there's an element of sacrifice. The amount of hours that a member of Parliament does and the level of responsibility, typically isn't remunerated as it would be remunerated in many other sectors of the economy. But there is a compromise you make in terms of public service, and that will have an impact on personal life. But I do think Parliament could be. It's improved. Members of Parliament now taking young children through the voting lobbies and things like that. But it's still a weird place. It's not the real world in many ways, and yes, that does have an effect on you.
Finally, then, final exit interview question: what will you do next?
Well, I don't know. I was writing my CV actually a couple of weekends ago,
You and dozens of others.
which was an interesting,
How do you do
interesting
that?
experience.
How do you stand out in a market now awash with the CVs of outgoing MPs?
Well, good question. I've got a few lines of inquiry, but I'm looking for a new challenge. I'm looking for a new opportunity. Not quite sure when I'm available, but but I'm looking forward to a new era in my life. And one of the things I thought to myself, I made the decision, I made the announcement almost exactly a year ago. I'd been thinking about it for about 18 months prior to that. But just before I made the announcement, I thought to myself, am I going to regret this in 6 months' time, in 9 months' time? And the honest answer to that is no. I've made the right decision. So I'm looking to the future with optimism.
Well, Henry Smith, thank you for joining us for your exit interview on Times Radio.
My pleasure. Thank you.